Hello Internet, welcome to part 6 of our series on Socrates and Plato. This will be the final part in our series, so I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I'll include a link to the other parts over there, so have a look at those if you want. In this video we're going to be looking at Socrates and Plato. We're going to be looking at their ethics and their politics. We're going to begin by looking at Socrates and Plato on sort of psychology of the soul, and why we're going to do that will become apparent later on. So Plato on psychology, he believed that the human soul or mind had three distinct parts, and he discusses his theory in his book The Republic. Again, we're not going to go through the details of the book, but I'll include a link in the description. As per usual, he presents his view through the mouth of Socrates. So, on to the three parts. First, there is appetite, the appetitive part of our soul, which consists of our desires and urges. Now, Socrates asks us to imagine this as being like a many-headed hydra. The hydra was a monster in Greek mythology that had many heads. Hercules eventually kills it, but whenever you cut off one of the heads, two heads grows back, and Hercules eventually kills it by cauterizing the chopped off heads until there are no heads left. If he hadn't done that, it would have just kept on growing two heads. When one was removed, getting more and more heads, more and more dangerous. So why are appetites conceptualized as being like a hydra? Well, it's many-headed because we have many desires pushing us and pulling us in different directions. We want lots of different things, some of which are mutually exclusive. They don't necessarily all add up in a rational way. So that's the first bit of our mind, our soul, our psychology. Second, there's what in Greek is called thumos, which is often translated as spirit. Now, we don't have a precise translation for this, but we might think of it as our willpower, our passion, our bravery, and our aggression. And when I was an undergraduate, one of my lecturers described it as being like cojones. Someone's got a lot of thumos, has a lot of cojones, they've got a lot of oomph. And I think that's quite a good way of getting your head around it. It's that part of us that drives us, our will. And Socrates asks us to imagine this as being like a lion, because it's kind of like bravery and will, which is, and lions are good symbols for that sort of thing. And then finally there's our reason, and our reason is the part of us that thinks, understands, reasons, and learns. And Socrates asks us to imagine it as being like a man. Why? Because human beings are rational creatures. We're the rational animal. We're the most wise, in theory, of all the animals out there. So those are the three parts. Plato/Socrates moves from this to an account of the good person. Right now, in a good person, the man, reason, rules over thumos, the lion, appetite, the hydra. Reason, the man, defeats appetite, the hydra, with the aid of the thumos. He couldn't do it by himself. The hydra's too strong. So we need to have our thumos to help us out. So the three parts are sort of supposed to be in balance, but they're ruled by reason. They're not co-equal or anything like that. If you're not governed by reason and you're a bad person, and if thumos dominates, then you're going to be hot-headed, quick-tempered, and impulsive, which is obviously not good. And so often, young men tend to be ruled by thumos. They're too aggressive, too angry. If appetite rules, they're going to be gluttonous, slothful, and lascivious, which means lustful. And that's even worse. So we need to have reason with the help of thumos ruling over our appetites. And that's what a good person looks like. So another allegory that Socrates gives us for the soul is found in the Phaedrus. Again, I'm not going to look at the book itself, but I'll include a link in the description. Socrates asks us to imagine the soul as being like a chariot with a charioteer and two horses, one white, one black. And the charioteer represents reason, he's the man, and the white horse represents thumos, and the black horse represents appetite. And the goal is to ascend to divine heights, but the black horse in particular is going to cause problems. The appetite is going to cause problems. The thumos can also be problematic, but for most people, throughout most of their lives, it's the appetites that kind of drag us down from being the sorts of people we ought to be and that we want to be. So that's his conception of the of the human mind or soul. Plato thinks that different people are ruled by different parts of the soul. We've kind of touched on this already. Most people, sadly, are dominated by their appetites. So they're going to be greedy, lustful, slothful, so on and so forth. Some people will be dominated by their thumos, and we often see this in young adults. But some people will be naturally dominated by their thumos throughout their life, and they're going to be kind of aggressive. They'll often be very good sort of sports stars and warriors and athletes and so on and so forth. Very good at that, but they're not necessarily going to be calm and controlled enough to be perfectly virtuous. A lucky few will be naturally dominated by their reason. However, even these people will need to have their reason cultivated through education in order to achieve and maintain this state. So for a lot of people, for most people, there's no hope. You're never going to be an ideal person. You can still get better, but you're never going to be an ideal person. But the lucky few, naturally dominated by their reason, you have a chance, but you're going to need to work at it. If you cultivate your virtues, cultivate your reason, you can become a sort of perfectly good person, at least in principle. I'm sure that in reality, this is sort of an overly simplistic division and everybody's a little bit of all three, but I think the basic distinction kind of makes sense. So in the same way that Plato/Socrates moves from an account of the mind or the human psychology to ethics, he now moves from ethics to politics. He models his ideal city-state on the ideal person. Now, if you don't know, in ancient Greece, they didn't have nation-states, nations like France and Germany. Instead, they had city-states like Athens and Sparta. So these are much smaller territories consisting of one big city, like Athens, and then some surrounding towns and villages and farmland, much smaller units. So they're talking about the city-state. Potentially, however, we can apply many of their insights to nation-states. That's open to discussion, something we can think about. So he models his ideal city-state on the ideal person. And the goal is for the city to be ruled by reason, which kind of makes sense in the same way that individual humans ought to be ruled by reason, the city-state ought to be ruled by reason. How is this to be done? Well, Socrates begins his account by highlighting that none of us are self-sufficient. So Socrates is going to give us a full account of how the city-state emerges and how it ought to be governed. And he begins by highlighting that none of us is self-sufficient. Now, even Bear Grylls at various times needs help from others, not least of all when he was a child growing up and when he gets to old age and can no longer look after himself. He's going to need people to physically look after him. But even now, in order for him to live a full, rich and complete life, he needs other humans to interact with and to work with and to give him the various luxuries and opportunities that we all need to live well, not just to survive. So none of us is self-sufficient. All of us, to a greater or lesser extent, at various points in our lives, depend on others for our survival and well-being. As a result, we need to form families and then larger communities. And these larger communities form the foundation of the city-state. You start with individuals, move up to families, which are more self-sufficient, and then larger communities that can be relatively self-sufficient. And those form the foundation of the city-state. Socrates then observes that we usually perform best when we specialize. When we specialize at one particular task. So the cobbler cobbles, the farmer farms, the fisherman fishes. The question now becomes, how do we divide up our citizens? How do we put them in the right profession so that they can specialize at what they ought to do? The answer, according to Socrates, is that we divide people up in accordance with the part of their soul which dominates. Those who are dominated by appetite will form one class, and they're going to be the workers and the labourers, and this will be the biggest class. Those who are dominated by thumos will form another, the auxiliaries, and they will be the soldiers and administrators, and they're going to be the second largest class. The select few who are dominated by reason will rule as philosopher kings. So, as a philosopher, this theory sort of appeals to me, as you can imagine. The auxiliaries and the philosopher kings working together are the guardians and are in charge of society. How do we identify which class people belong in? At a young age, so Socrates says, all children should be tested. Those who show promise will be separated from their parents and will be educated. Those who do not will be assigned to the worker class. As the promising children progress through their education and eventual military training, they will be tested at regular intervals. Those who are successful will continue their education, and those who fail will be assigned to the auxiliary class. And this process continues for about 50 years, a long time. Education continues all throughout both childhood and adulthood. The successful few eventually graduate at about the age of 50 and become philosopher kings. And they then alternate their time between ruling, assisted by the auxiliaries, and philosophizing. So there are three classes in Plato's society: workers or laborers, guardians, auxiliaries and soldiers, and then sort of guardians proper, the philosopher kings. As a result, the ideal city will match the ideal person. Reason, the philosopher kings, rules with the help of thumos, the auxiliaries, over the appetites, workers. Now, Plato allows for the possibility that guardians will be born to workers or laborers and vice versa. And in a surprisingly progressive move, he also allows for the possibility that women might be guardians, which at the time was quite a shocking view. But he allows for the idea that women could fit into any class. He thought that if women were properly educated, they could have the same intellectual powers as men, which we know to be true. But at the time, that was quite a shocking idea. So in that aspect, Plato/Socrates surprisingly forward-thinking. As you may be beginning to tell, the rest of the theory is a bit more alarming, quite authoritarian. But that particular bit, quite forward-thinking. So the guardians will live entirely communal lives. There'll be no private property, and everything will be shared. This will include wives, husbands, and children. The guardians aren't even allowed to have their own families. And so Plato is advocating an early and extremely radical version of communism over 2,000 years before Karl Marx. And so many of the debates that we had in the 20th century and still today in the 21st century about communism, socialism, capitalism, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato were having those exact same debates almost 2,500 years ago. Socrates justifies this radical version of communism by arguing that this will motivate the guardians to pursue the common good. If they have private property, they will be tempted by the desire to pursue their own wealth, and if they have their own families, they will favour and promote their own children and family members over the impartial good of the city-state. Now, Aristotle, in his book The Politics, spends quite some time engaging with these claims and dismantling them, I think, quite effectively. But if you're interested in this topic, you could have a look at what Aristotle has to say about it in The Politics. I think also it starts to become clear now that Plato's ideal society is really quite authoritarian, quite radical. And perhaps most of us wouldn't really want to live in it. Just as a point of clarification, Socrates, as far as I can tell, having read it a few times, he doesn't seem to specify whether the workers and labourers are to be allowed their own families and properties. He seems to sort of lose interest in them once they've been distinguished from the guardians, which is, I think, quite telling. So again, you definitely wouldn't want to be a worker or a labourer. How are we to convince the workers and the guardians to agree to this state of affairs? Particularly for the workers, this is not a good deal, and I think also for the guardians, this isn't a terribly good deal either. But definitely for the workers, this is a pretty rubbish deal. So how are we going to convince them to agree to this? Well, Socrates suggests we do it using a noble lie. He wants the authorities to lie to their people. Whereas I think this is quite radical. I think that most of us would hope that the government doesn't lie to us and think it shouldn't lie to us. I suspect a lot of us have the sneaking suspicion that quite often it does, but we would hope that it doesn't and we think that it shouldn't. But Socrates suggests that the authorities do lie to their people, and he suggests they create a noble lie designed to create law and order. So the noble lie will say that God created human beings, and into their souls he put either bronze or iron, silver or gold. Those of bronze or iron become labourers, those of silver become soldiers, and those with gold become the rulers. And he acknowledges that at first the lie will not be believed, at least not believed to be literally true, but he thinks that in time later generations will come to believe it and will take it literally, being literally true. So it's quite a sort of radical solution. How do you convince the people to agree to this system? You lie to them. I think that sort of brings my summary of Plato on politics to an end. We can see that it's quite a radical system. It's quite authoritarian and quite radically communist, and that might give many of us pause for thought. But perhaps there are some insights here that we can take. I think this is really important when reading ethics and philosophy, political philosophy in particular. It doesn't need to be all or nothing. Sometimes you can accept that there are some insights whilst disagreeing with other bits. So I think that Socrates and Plato go too far, but maybe there are some insights we can grasp here and that we can take forward and use productively. So that's it for Socrates and Plato on politics, and that's it for our series on Socrates and Plato. I've been working hard on my new series, which will be on Eastern philosophy. It's going to be in a bit different format. I've dug out a camera that my wife had hidden somewhere. I think hopefully that will improve the audio quality. I know that sometimes the audio cuts out on this, so I think hopefully the audio should be much better, and it's going to have a completely different format with me just talking to the camera, and then I've been playing around with some editing software, so I'm going to overlay images at key points to illustrate the idea rather than using this PowerPoint format. So I hope you enjoy that. I think it will be a big improvement. I hope you enjoyed this series, but that's it for now. And I'll look forward, hopefully, to seeing you in my series on Eastern philosophy. Okay, take care, guys. Bye bye.